staring into a darkness hiding 80,000 enemies. You are outnumbered 10 to 1 and ordered to abandon the sacred samurai tradition of taking heads for glory. This radical command wasn't just a tactic, it was a death warrant for tradition that would either save your clan or lead to its absolute extinction. For decades, the Hojo clan, dismissed by the aristocracy as mere upstarts from the south, had been methodically carving a piece of empire out of the traditional lands of the Uesugi lords. This was a direct challenge to the ancient order of Japan, as the Hojo were seen as new money with no divine right to rule the fertile eastern heartlands. The Uesugi, who had held sway over these lands for centuries under the authority of the shogunate, viewed the Hojo as a plague that needed to be cauterized. But the old guard had finally seen enough. In a move of unprecedented political unity, two rival branches of the Uesugi clan, the Ogigayatsu and the Yamanouchi, joined hands with the ancient authority of the Ashikaga shogunate, forming a coalition of staggering proportions. They gathered a host of 80,000 samurai and ashigaru, a force so massive that contemporary accounts claim the dust kicked up from their march choked the sun for 3 days and turned the sky to a deathly ash. This was an era where 10,000 men was considered a formidable army. 80,000 was an extinction-level event. Their objective was Kawagoe Castle, the vital strategic hinge holding the Hojo's northern territories together and providing a gateway to the heart of the plain. It was a fortress of wood and stone that now stood as the only thing between the Hojo and total annihilation. The air around the castle grew thick, with the tension of 80,000 souls moving in unison toward a single, fixed point on the map. If Kawagoe fell, the Hojo capital at Odawara would be next, and the clan would be erased from existence, their legacy burned into the dirt and their names stricken from the imperial records. But numbers are only an advantage if you can see who you are fighting, and the Uesugi were about to go blind in the most terrifying way imaginable. The siege of Kawagoe began not with a bang, but with a suffocating, grinding embrace that lasted for months. The 80,000 invaders completely surrounded the fortress, their encampments turning the surrounding plains into a sprawling, temporary city of war that stretched as far as the horizon. Thousands of banners, representing dozens of different daimyo, fluttered in the wind, a visual testament to the sheer scale of the alliance. The campfires at night looked like a fallen galaxy, a constant reminder to those inside of the impossible odds they faced. Inside the walls was Hojo's iron core, Hojo Tsunashige, famously known as the Yellow Devil. He commanded a mere 3,000 defenders of the elite Yellow Battalion, men who wore bright yellow back flags that signaled their status as the clan's most lethal shock troops. These men were veterans of 100 skirmishes, trained to fight with a ferocity that bordered on the fanatical. But even iron can be ground to powder by the weight of 80,000. As the months dragged on from autumn into the biting cold of spring, the coalition leaders Uesugi Norimasa and Uesugi Tomosada grew dangerously, almost pathologically complacent. They did not see a threat. They saw a trapped, starving animal. They believed the Hojo were essentially dead men walking, merely waiting for the formalities of surrender. The siege lines became a site of decadent festivals, sake drinking, and poetry readings, as the Uesugi lords believed the Hojo were too terrified to even consider a sortie. They mocked the defenders from across the moats, shouting insults and throwing scraps of food to taunt the starving garrison, confident that time was their greatest ally. This arrogance filtered down to the common soldiers, who began to leave their armor unbuckled and their weapons out of reach. The encampment became a place of leisure rather than a theater of war. But while the invaders drank and celebrated their inevitable victory, the young Hojo Ujiyasu at Odawara was not preparing a funeral. He was sitting in silence, dissecting the psychological state of his enemies and waiting for the precise moment when their arrogance would turn into a fatal, irreversible weakness. As the 6th month of the siege dragged on, the conditions inside Kawagoe Castle turned dire, bordering on the catastrophic. Rations were dwindling to a handful of dry, dusty rice per man, and the constant, rhythmic psychological pressure of the enemy's presence, the sound of their drums, The smell of their cooking fires began to fray the nerves of even the most hardened veteran defenders. Men watched their comrades grow thin and pale, their armor hanging loose on their skeletal frames, yet they kept their blades sharp. Every night, they looked out at the thousands of enemy campfires and felt the crushing weight of their own isolation. Yet, Hojo Tsuneshige maintained a discipline that bordered on the supernatural, walking the ramparts every hour of the day and night, his yellow banner a constant, defiant spark in the gloom. He reminded his men that a Hojo warrior does not bow to numbers, only to the will of the clan. He instilled a sense of purpose in his men that transcended physical hunger. He knew that his brother, Uesugi, was playing a deeper, more dangerous game than anyone realized. From Odawara, Uesugi began a campaign of masterful, calculated deception. He sent frantic, weeping messengers to the Uesugi camps, carrying letters that begged for a peaceful surrender in the most humiliating, groveling terms. He offered to give up the castle, cede all his lands, and pay massive indemnities if only his men were allowed to live. These letters were intentionally pathetic, crafted to confirm every elitist bias the Uesugi lords held about the cowardly Hojo upstarts. To the coalition, Uesugi was a broken man, a dog showing its throat. They ignored his pleas, not because they wanted to fight, but because they enjoyed the spectacle of his public desperation. They allowed their sentries to sleep at their posts, and their discipline to rot away into a haze of alcohol and overconfidence, convinced that no relief force would ever dare to march against such a massive host. They were so convinced of their superiority that they stopped maintaining their own perimeter defenses. But was it a signal for rescue, or the final, desperate breath of a dying clan? While the Uesugi feasted and laughed, Uesugi was handpicking 8,000 of his most mobile and loyal troops, training them in absolute silence in the forests near Odawara. He stripped them of everything that was not essential for a lightning strike. No extra rations, no heavy camp gear, no unnecessary weight that might rattle or slow them down. He wanted them to move like a shadow across the land. In the warrior culture of the 16th century, the collection of enemy heads was the primary way a samurai proved his worth and earned his pay. It was the ultimate trophy of the battlefield and a man's only ticket to social advancement and wealth. To take a head was to take a life's worth of achievement and secure one's family for a generation. But Uesugi issued an order that shocked his veteran commanders to their very core, an order that felt like a betrayal of their warrior soul. "Do not take heads," he explained with cold, surgical logic that the act of stopping to decapitate a fallen foe took precious seconds, broke the momentum of a charge, and distracted a soldier from the next target in the dark. In a night raid, speed was the only armor they had. He demanded that they value the life of the clan over the glory of the individual. On this night, they were not there for glory, gold, or individual recognition. They were there for the raw survival of their bloodline. If they stopped to claim a trophy, they would die, and the clan would die with them. In a culture where a head was the only way to get paid, how do you convince 8,000 men to abandon their reward for a mission that looks like a certain massacre? It was a test of loyalty that would define the Hojo forever, a choice between personal greed and the collective survival of the clan. They were told that their reward would be the continued existence of their families, or a glorious death in the mud. If you enjoy these deep dives into the tactical brilliance of history's greatest underdog victories, please make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment of the action. The weather itself seemed to conspire with the Hojo, as if the heavens had decided the Uesugi had grown too proud and needed to be brought low by the elements themselves. On the night of May 19th, 1546, a violent, unseasonable rainstorm rolled across the Kanto plain with terrifying force. The wind howled through the bamboo groves like a vengeful spirit, and the driving rain turned the earth into a treacherous, sucking sludge that could swallow a man's boot. Visibility dropped to mere feet as the thick, heavy clouds blotted out the moon and stars, leaving the world in a state of primordial darkness. It was a night when no sane commander would expect an attack, a night when most soldiers huddled in their tents, wrapped in their cloaks, and cursed the cold, damp air. This environmental chaos was the perfect shroud for Ujeyasu's plan. Under this veil of natural chaos, Ueyasu moved his 8,000 men. They discarded their heavy lacquer surcoats and ornate helmet ornaments that might catch the light or snag on brush, moving like ghosts through the mud and the dark. They approached the Uesugi camps from multiple directions, their footfalls masked by the roar of the storm and the rhythmic, heavy thrum of the rain against the earth. They moved in absolute silence, communicating only through hand signals and the shared purpose of their mission. Inside the castle, Tsunashige saw the prearranged signal, a single, dim light flickering momentarily from a distant, hidden ridge. This was the spark they had starved for. The Yellow Battalion checked their spearheads, tightened their straw sandals, and shared a final, silent look in the dark. The trap was finally set. The 80,000 men of the coalition were about to learn that numbers mean absolutely nothing when the chain of command is severed in the absolute terrifying dark of a storm. The first strike was silent, surgical, and terrifyingly efficient. Hojo scouts moved through the outer perimeter of the Uesugi camp, using daggers and short swords to silence sentries who were huddled under their cloaks to escape the rain, many of whom died before they could even draw a breath to scream. They were like wolves in a sheepfold, moving through the lines of tents with a deadly focus. When the main force of 8,000 finally charged, they did not use traditional war cries or blow conch shells. They did not announce their presence with the typical fanfares of samurai warfare. They fell upon the sleeping, drunken camps like a sudden, silent landslide. The no-heads order turned the Hojo infantry into a relentless, terrifying machine of pure lethality. They moved from tent to tent with mechanical precision, stabbing through the heavy fabric and cutting down men who were still fumbling in the dark for their swords or trying to lace their armor with trembling fingers. Panic, more infectious than any plague, swept through the Uesugi ranks like wildfire. In the pitch blackness and the driving rain, it was impossible for the coalition soldiers to tell friend from foe. Men woke up to the sound of steel on flesh and began to strike at any shadow that moved, effectively doing the Hojo's work for them as the massive camp descended into a fratricidal nightmare of friendly fire. The sheer density of the 80,000 became their greatest weakness, as they lacked the space to mobilize or distinguish themselves from the enemy. Every second that Uesugi had spent drinking, writing poetry, and mocking the Hojo in the weeks prior was now being paid back in a currency of blood, terror, and total, unmitigated confusion. As the chaos reached its peak, and the screams of the dying filled the air, the heavy timber gates of Kawagoe Castle groaned open against the mud and the wind. Hojo Tsunashige and his 3,000 defenders, fueled by months of hunger, desperation, and simmering rage, burst forth in a perfectly coordinated sortie. They did not look like men who had been starving. They looked like vengeful spirits. They slammed into the rear of the already crumbling Uesugi lines, completing the encirclement. This was the Great Sortie, a maneuver that combined with Ujeyasu's exterior pressure to create a hammer and anvil effect of devastating proportions. The Uesugi commander, Tomosada, attempted to rally his personal guard amidst the mud and the piles of bodies, but the darkness and the rain made leadership impossible. He was cut down in the total confusion before he could even mount his horse or issue a single coherent order to his vast, disintegrating army. The massive coalition, a force that should have been invincible by every law of warfare, fractured into thousands of terrified, screaming individuals. They trampled one another in the mud, fleeing from an enemy they could not see, and whose panicked minds imagined to be an endless army of demons rising from the earth. By the time the first rays of a gray, wet, and silent dawn broke over the horizon, the 80,000 were gone. The retreat was a chaotic scramble for the hills. Thousands lay dead in the mud, their blood mixing with the rainwater in deep red pools that stained the plain. And the remnants of the largest army in Japan were scattered in total, humiliating disgrace to the four winds. In the cold, unforgiving morning light, Ueyasu stood amidst the wreckage of the coalition camps, surrounded by abandoned banners, discarded weapons, and the heavy, metallic smell of death. He did not look like a conqueror. He looked like a man who had narrowly avoided an execution and had seen the face of death and lived to tell of it. He stood over the captured banners of the Uesugi, a young leader who had just rewritten the rules of engagement. His gamble had paid off with a tactical perfection that modern historians and military strategists still struggle to fully quantify today. It was the ultimate black swan event of the Sengoku period. The No-Heads night raid had not just saved a single castle, it had shattered the political and military power of the Uesugi in the Kanto region forever. The death of Tomosada meant the immediate extinction of one of the major Uesugi branches, the Ogigayatsu, a loss from which they would never recover. The power vacuum left by their defeat was immense. The surviving lords were forced into a humiliating, disorganized retreat that would eventually lead them to seek the protection of the legendary Uesugi Kenshin years later, effectively ending their independent power and status as masters of the East. For the Hojo, this was the sunrise of the lion, the moment they proved they were no longer upstarts, but the rightful masters of their own destiny. Uesugi had proven that strategy, psychology, and the cold willingness to break ancient, sacred tradition were more powerful than a 10-to-1 numerical advantage. The impact of Kawagoe echoed through the halls of power for the next 40 years, reshaping the map of Japan and the very nature of samurai warfare. It established the Hojo as the undisputed iron-fisted masters of the Kanto, a hegemony that would only be broken decades later by the great unifier, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, at the very end of the era. The Hojo upstarts had become the lions of the East because they were willing to be dishonorable by attacking at night and ignoring the trophy-taking that defined their class. They proved that history is not written by the most numerous or the most well-born, but by those who refuse to follow the rules of an era that is already passing them by. The Siege of Kawagoe is still studied as one of the greatest night raids in military history, alongside the likes of Okehazama. It serves as a timeless, haunting reminder that in the heat of conflict, the greatest weapon is not the sharpest sword, the most accurate bow, or the thickest armor, but the mind of the commander, who knows when to throw away the script and rewrite reality on the fly. This battle remains a textbook example of how overconfidence is the greatest enemy of any military force, no matter how large or well-equipped. It proves that the impossible is often just a matter of perspective and preparation. The Hojo's governance over the Kanto would be characterized by the same spirit of pragmatic innovation. What do you think was the most critical factor in the Hojo victory, the radical no-heads order that prioritized speed over personal wealth, or the months of deceptive letters that rotted the Uesugi's discipline from the inside out? Let us know in the comments below. This victory at Kawagoe ensured that the Hojo name would be remembered not as a historical footnote, but as one of the most powerful and innovative dynasties to ever rule the East. They took a death sentence and turned it into the very foundation of an empire that would last for generations, governing the Kanto with a blend of military might and sophisticated administration. They showed the world that a small, disciplined force with a clear vision and an unconventional leader can overcome the most insurmountable odds. Their story is a testament to the power of resilience and the courage to challenge the status quo when everything is on the line. The legacy of Kawagoe reminds us that history belongs to those who dare to dream of the impossible and have the tactical genius to execute it. If you found this saga of samurai strategy and the terrifying no-heads night compelling, share this story with someone who appreciates the art of the underdog and the power of a brilliant, unconventional mind. Thank you for joining us for this journey into the dark, rain-soaked night of 1546. We will see you in the next chapter of history, where the odds are once again stacked, the steel is sharp, and the outcome is anything but certain.